When the sun leans toward the west, the sky is painted in dull gold and violet smoke. Britain breathes deeper, the air on the hills thickens, as if the earth itself holds its breath. The old forests begin to whisper quietly but persistently. It is not just the wind, not just leaves rustling in the breeze. It is memory, the memory of the land, spirits, and time itself. At the edge of daylight and approaching darkness, when the birds fall silent and the fireflies have not yet awakened, a time of other sounds begins. The crack of a branch under a fox's paw, the clinking of a chain on an abandoned chapel. Rustlings in which the ear hears more than sound and meaning. It hears a story. In these moments, by the hearth's warming mossy dwellings and stone halls, words are reborn. Words in which lie and truth, fear and hope merge. Today you will hear one of them. A story born not in a single day. A story that perhaps lives in every stone, in a puddle after rain, in a forgotten alley of London. A story about a boy who did not know his name until the name called out to him itself. About a king without a crown, a warrior without a sword, a hope born from darkness. It will be about him, Arthur. But long before the sword gleamed in the stone under the morning sun, long before, Camelot, the round table, knights and songs. The story begins with a vision. Deep in the thicket, among ancient trees, stood an old man. He was called by many names, the madman, the prophet, the hermit, but he was called Merlin. His clothes were made of wool and leaves. His gaze went beyond time. He stood at the foot of a circle of stone slabs with a smoldering staff in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a key. Through the cracks of the stones seeped an unusual mist, the one that brings visions. Merlin saw a blazing throne, a child in a drop of blood, blood on the ground, wind in the flags calling to battle. He saw a boy in a disheveled shirt, with a star burning in his eyes. Britain was torn apart. Kings rose and fell like leaves in the wind, and people forgot the old faith and connection to the land. Balance was held by a thin thread that Merlin held on his staff. He knew the time had come. The time of a king, not a tyrant or conqueror, but one who would serve the land and listen to it. A king who will know fear and pain, but choose the light, and then, in the wet forest, a new era will begin, an era of hope and change, brought by that boy with the star in his eyes. On the ashes of the fire, Merlin began to create. He wove spells not with words, but with thought, not with gestures, but with spirit. He sowed the seed of history into the earth, falling asleep under the mists. King Uther Pendragon was mighty, and his sword sang in ballads. Enemies trembled at the mention of his name, but with strength lived a silence in him, like a shadow. In long winter nights, in chambers with tapestries and trophies of battles, he listened to the silence. It was not the enemy's voice that troubled him, but emptiness and loneliness. Through the flame of the hearth and the gold of the crown, he sought a gaze, familiar, warm, beyond the throne. An heir who would accept the burden of all Britain. His realm grew, but with it grew the threat. Without an heir after Uther's death, chaos and war for the throne would begin. One day he saw her, Igraine, the beautiful, impregnable wife of the Duke of Tintagel, one of Uther's proudest vassals. Uther could not forget Igraine, neither in the morning nor after days. In her voice sounded the ocean, in her movements the rhythm of ancient dances. In Igraine's eyes was a silent knowledge of something lost even by the king himself. But she was unreachable, and any step toward her was a step toward war. Then Uther summoned Merlin and said, "Help me." His voice was full of hope and anxiety about the unknown future. As a king, as a man, Merlin was silent for a long time, then said that this alliance would bring a great king to the world. But he demanded the child, the king's son. Merlin explained, the son would not be yours, he would belong to Britain. The king, clenching his fists, nodded in agreement. Then began the mystery and magic of Merlin. On the night when the heavens were split by thunder and waves crashed against the rocks, warriors prepared for battle at the walls of Tintagel. Merlin changed King Uther's appearance. The king entered the castle not as an enemy, but under the guise of Tintagel. Deceived by magic, Igraine let him in amidst the roar of storms and clashing swords. That night a boy was conceived whose name would become a legend, Arthur. But Merlin reminded of his condition. He must not know the throne. Power known too early turns the heart to stone, said Merlin. He needed a sword that knows how to be a tree, not a stone. When Igraine gave birth, the infant was taken from the palace under the cover of fog. He was given to a simple man, but noble in spirit, Sir Ector. Sir Ector was a knight of the old school, not boasting of ranks. His home was a fortress for those seeking justice and protection. There Arthur began his life. He did not know who he really was. Childhood was modest, but not poor. Playing in the mud, duels with wooden swords. Lessons in horseback riding, hunting, and tales by the hearth accompanied his childhood. He grew strong, brave, and kind, unaware of his fate. He was an ordinary boy, with graceful movements, a firm voice, and nobility in his actions, which cannot be taught. Sir Ector loved him like his own, noticing something inexplicable in him. At night, Arthur saw vivid dreams like a glow in the night forest. In them was a castle on fire, a woman from a mirror lake with eyes full of waves, and a shining sword in a stone. Next to the sword stood an old man with a staff, his face hidden by a hood, but his presence was felt down to the chills. Arthur woke with heavy breathing and a heart beating like a drum on a march. He did not understand these images, but felt their importance. It was not a call, a voice, or a prophecy. It was blood remembering fate, a memory deeper than words, and a destiny awaiting response. Years passed like a flash of a sword in the twilight. King Pendragon, the great conqueror and ruler, fell. Some spoke of an enemy, others of sorrow, but he named no heir. With the king went hope and power. The kingdom fell into turmoil, and no one knew who would be the next ruler, or if he could fulfill fate. Britain, once bound by iron will, cracked into pieces. Lords, dukes, and barons, owning even a scrap of land, sought to proclaim themselves king. The crown became an empty chime. Castles burned, fortresses were besieged by neighbors. Roads once guarded grew over with grass and fear. People feared to travel, trade stopped, and trust vanished among all. But among the ashes remained hope. Merlin watched, not interfering in the disputes and not choosing sides. He, like an ancient oak, stood above the wind, seeing more than the earth. Merlin knew that the time had come. Among the ruins of Great Londinium, where the Romans poured bronze and blood, he ordered a massive black stone with a sword, as if born from the stone, to be set up. On the blade of the sword was engraved, "He who pulls me out will be the true king of Britain." The rumor of the prophetic stone spread like a storm across the plains. The lords sent their best knights. In armor, with trophies, standards, musicians, and priests, they gathered to try to pull the sword from the square. One shouted, gripping the hilt until his knuckles turned white. Another prayed on his knees. A third tried with the help of horses. The sword remained motionless despite all efforts. Some appealed to the gods, others to the ancient spirits. Months passed. Winter gave way to new times, but the sword still remained in the stone, waiting for its true master. In spring, the stone became a place of pilgrimage, an arena, and entertainment. But the prophecy was silent. On the day of the tournament in Londinium, two riders arrived, Arthur and Kay, his foster brother. They came not as heroes or messengers of fate, but simply as spectators. Kay was proud and sharp-tongued, meant to participate, but an hour before the start, the sword disappeared. Kay shouted, "Arthur, run! Find me another sword, and quickly!" Arthur, compliant and loyal, rushed to find the armorers, but all were busy or locked up. Then Arthur turned into an alley and came out onto the square. There he saw the stone, with the sword sticking out of it. He did not know the prophecy, he just thought the sword was free. Arthur approached, placed his hand on the hilt, and easily pulled the sword out. It came out of the stone as smoothly as an arrow from a quiver. A shout rang out behind him, and people began to gather. The leading figures expressed anger. "What are you doing?" then disbelief, then silence. Everyone was silent. "Who are you?" they asked him. Arthur replied, "I am Arthur, son of Sir Ector." The crowd buzzed. Some were outraged. Some laughed. A new story began, connected with young Arthur and his destiny. An empty coincidence. It's a trick. He just came earlier. Let him try again. Arthur, embarrassed, put the sword back into the stone, and at the crowd's request pulled it out again and again and again. The sword obeyed only him. None of the knights, none of the noble lords could move it even an inch. At the edge of the square stood a man in a gray cloak, almost blending with the crowd. He gave neither a sigh nor a gesture, only quietly smiled. It was Merlin. He knew who this boy was. He had known since that very night when he took him from Igraine. He had been waiting for this day. From that moment, history changed, at first reluctantly. Some lords did not want to acknowledge the peasant boy, but the sword was silent before them, and the people began to see something different in Arthur. He was calm. There was no pride in his words, but there was truth in his actions. Thus began a new era, an era not of swords, but of duty, the era of Camelot, the era of the king, born in secret but bringing light. Several weeks passed after the sword was pulled from the stone, but the tale, as it turned out, was only the beginning. While the common folk sang songs about the young chosen one, while children drew a figure with a sword on dusty walls, real Britain remained cold and distrustful. The land was torn not. Lords, accustomed to their castles and power, saw Arthur as a threat. They called him a boy behind closed doors, denying his right and name. Who placed Arthur on the throne? Prophecy and the stone. Some laughed, others prepared for war, arming themselves against the new king. News of uprisings came from the northern lands and Wales. Many hearts refused to accept a king who was not chosen. In each such heart, danger was born. Arthur understood this, but did not respond with threats and swords. He listened to Merlin. Merlin said, "Strength is not in swords, but in those who know how to listen." Arthur admitted he did not know how to do that. "Learn, go, see, listen. Only then will you become a king, not by right, but by essence," Merlin advised. Arthur did not sit in a tower, nor did he issue decrees. He mounted a horse and set out across the country. He stopped in villages, ate at the same table with peasants, repaired weapons himself, and helped people. If there was no squire, Arthur helped women who had lost their husbands, unloaded carts, and spent time with hermits. He spent nights in monasteries, in places where no royal retinue had ever been before. One lord received knights not on a throne, but personally. There was no anger in his eyes, only determination. He did not assert power, but inspired it. He did not demand loyalty, it was given freely. With each day, the circle of his followers grew stronger. The first was Sir Bedivere, a veteran without a hand, but with dignity. Then Sir Kay, a foster brother, first jealous, then loyal. Then came Sir Gawain, fiery and just, and Sir Pellinore, a monster hunter. Their alliance was firmly held by loyalty and mutual respect. Finally, from a ship across the sea, under a foreign sun, came Lancelot, a noble wandering knight. He had heard of the Lord and wished to see him personally. Lancelot approached Arthur without a bow, but looking into his eyes, he knelt himself. "You do not look like a king," he said. "Good," replied Arthur. "I do not want to look like one. I want to be real," said Arthur. Merlin, seeing the moment, took out an old scroll depicting the Round Table. "This will be your sign," said Merlin. "Here no one is above anyone, neither you nor them, not even me. You are first among equals. Thus begins the new Britain." Thus the Round Table appeared. It was assembled in the forest, a symbol of a new era where equality and honor became the foundation for all. The people gathered under the canopy of ancient oaks for the first council without weapons. They spoke not of conquests, but of justice, not of enemies, but of the value of peace. Each knight swore an oath to serve an ideal, not blind obedience. Ideals, like light in a cave, are visible from afar but painful to the eyes of those accustomed to living in the shadows. In the north rose Lord Worthing, old and fearsome. He did not recognize Arthur and considered him an impostor. He gathered an army for the first real battle. The night before the battle was cold. The warriors silently sharpened their blades and wrote letters to their families. Arthur sat by the fire alone, with the torches extinguished. Merlin approached Arthur. "Tomorrow you will learn the price of your name," he said. Arthur replied, "I am not afraid for myself. I'm afraid to kill what I live for." Merlin said, "Your blood is not your strength. Your truth is here. If it does not waver, no one will break you." That day Arthur did not order an attack. Arthur rode forward alone. Even those who came to kill him heard him. He spoke of a land greater than wars, a country where lords are not masters. He spoke of servants, honor, and forgiveness. His words were stronger than the sword, and in them lived hope for peace and justice. The new world began with a battle that lasted briefly. Worthing fought fiercely, but Arthur stopped his sword and lowered it, sparing his enemy. "Kill," said Worthing. "I offer you not death, but a place at the table." Worthing bowed, and thus the first enemy of New Britain was defeated. Victory was achieved not by force, but by justice. Arthur became not just a king, but one awaited by the earth itself with destiny and hope. Years passed, and Camelot rose above the lands like a beacon of hope. Arthur became a legend, strengthening his power with every victory and expanding influence through alliances. The borders of Britain were now defined not by swords, but by the respective allies. Yet with each peace, Arthur felt not rage, but a mysterious shadow drawing near. This shadow was faceless, did not come with a sword, but was felt in the silence of the forests and the eyes of seers, like an approaching threat. Enemies across the seas became more cruel and enigmatic. They whispered spells instead of battle cries, changing the nature of war and danger. Arthur saw how the world was changing, and understood that the sword forged by man would no longer be enough for protection and victory. Merlin knew this before Arthur. He remained silent for a long time, until one evening, when the silence of Camelot was like the breath of a beast, he approached the king. "Time to go where?" asked Arthur, awaiting an answer in the silence that foretold new trials and changes in Camelot's fate. "To where there are no names on maps, where there are no people, only origins, where water knows more than sages." Thus begins Arthur's solitary journey, revealing the truth. Alone, right? Because only solitude cuts away all excess and shows who you are. Arthur saddled his horse and rode off before dawn, telling no one. Only the wind knew the way. He rode long through misty valleys where the grass brushed the stirrups, through ancient groves where trees whispered in unknown tongues, guided only by the secret road. He rode to where no road led, to the point where the world had not yet decided to be dream or reality, to where the origins of all living and unknown things lie. And one day, in the morning twilight, he reached the lake lying among the rocks like the eye of an ancient beast. The air was thick, and in this silence, the heart beat like a scream. Arthur dismounted and approached the water's edge when a hand rose from the depths. White, slender, but strong. In the hand was a sword. Its blade shone not with light, but with meaning. Behind it appeared a woman, beautiful but not of the human world, with a dress of water and hair of seaweed and light. Her eyes were bottomless wells, in which not answers, but questions drowned. She said, "You have come," revealing the secret Arthur had sought alone. "Not for glory," she said. Her voice did not sound, but vibrated in every blade of grass. That is why it deserved attention and respect. She stepped closer. The water did not ripple for a moment. Arthur extended his hand not as a warrior, but as a student, and took the sword. The sword was heavy, but not in weight. It lay in his hand like truth, unliftable but necessary. "Its name is Excalibur," said the Lady of the Lake. "It was not made for killing. Excalibur was made to give power to those who know how to hold it without gripping. If the truth is strong, it is always sharp. If it falters, the sword will dull." Arthur bowed to the Lady of the Lake, not knowing if it was a ritual. He just felt that it had to be so. Then she disappeared, as did the hand, as did the mist. Arthur returned to Camelot by evening. The sword was at his belt. The blade did not glow, but all warriors stepped back. The warriors felt the power of the blade, which spoke even in silence. Merlin met Arthur silently, only nodding, saying, "One knot of fate is tied." "But many threads lie ahead," Merlin added. That night, the wind in the towers fell silent. Even it understood. A sword had appeared before which lies themselves tremble. After returning from the lake, Arthur became different. He spoke little, but every word and deed carried the weight and wisdom of a new ruler. The word became more important than any code of laws. The knights sensed change. The people found peace. Only Merlin, watching the king, knew of the growing loneliness within him. He was the king of the whole country, but belonged to no one. In the south, in the lands of Lodogrents, a long dispute over borders was underway. Arthur decided not to send an army. Arthur went there himself. Among cherry orchards and the sounds of music, he saw her for the first time. Guinevere, the king's daughter, like spring itself in silk. She laughed with her friends, played with a falcon on her wrist. It seemed she did not notice how the world around froze at her appearance. Arthur watched and could not look away. He had seen many women, but there was something different about Guinevere. She did not pretend, she simply was. When they were introduced and she bowed her head, Arthur forgot words for the first time. "You do not look like a king," she said directly. "And you do not look like anyone's choice," he replied. They talked all night about justice, dreams, and power without harm. The next morning he said to Merlin, "I want to marry. Are you sure I am choosing a woman, not a symbol? I am not choosing a queen. I am choosing—" The wedding was modest by royal standards, but all of Camelot buzzed with happiness. Guinevere walked in a dress woven as if from morning mist. Everyone who looked at Guinevere believed. The king was now not just a ruler, but a man. The years with her were soft gold, filled with trust and laughter. Arthur trusted, laughed, and was silent with her. His silence did not oppress, but healed. She was not a warrior, but she kept Camelot balanced among extremes. Thus was born a queen not by blood, but by soul. He was a king, but even kings in armor are not protected from wounds that grow from within. You cannot hide from blood. In Arthur's blood lived the most complex enemy, his sister Morgana, the daughter of Igraine from her first marriage, born in a long-burned castle. Her childhood passed in stone halls among women who taught obedience and men who despised weakness. She grew like a vine in a crack of the wall. Morgana reached for the light, but her roots were in darkness. Her beauty was northern, cold and alluring, not gentle but commanding. The main thing was not in appearance. Since youth, Morgana sought knowledge that was feared. She found forgotten texts, sought druids, and spoke with them. She learned to embroider, writing runes on silk, and receiving mirrors. She enchanted them to cast protection and hide the secrets of her heart and thoughts. Merlin felt her pulse in the air of Camelot, warning Arthur, "Be careful with her. In her heart is a wind that can become a storm without warmth and care." Arthur replied, "She is family. I am not afraid when it comes to those close to me. You confuse blood with true closeness, Merlin." He believed in the power of kinship and trust. Merlin said that not everyone we are born with stays with us until the end, but Arthur was young and believed in the best despite the wise advisor's doubts. Morgana smiled at Arthur, spoke the right words, participated in councils, and made donations, seeming like the perfect lady in the eyes of Camelot. But beyond Camelot, Morgana was building something else. In the northern lands, she gathered supporters among the wronged and those who found no place in the new order. She did not demand blood, but offered meaning. You are not obliged to bow. Remember who you were before Arthur became everything to you. Morgana was not building an army. She was cultivating doubt, and whispers began in the palace. People found runes under stones by the spring and noticed strange shadows. Disappearing mirrors, knights in the forms of smoke. Something happened that even Arthur could not understand. Merlin simply vanished without a trace. No letter, no sign remained. They said Merlin was tired of mortals and went to the edge of the world, where the river of time is lost in the mountains and birds do not sing. This is the story told in whispers. Others spoke of Morgana, who lured Merlin with charms, summoned him to the Valley of Eclipse, where day and night merge and time stands still. In this valley, even a wizard forgets who he was. Morgana ruled silently, appearing at the throne more often, speaking with the knights, looking longer than necessary. She did not challenge. She filled the void left by Merlin. Arthur felt the cold but did not understand where it came from. Arthur remained king, but with each day he grew more lonely. Among the knights, there was no one who shone as brightly as Sir Lancelot. Sir Lancelot came not by command, but by a dream. Rumors spread about the young king who conquered not by sword, but by mercy at the Round Table. Lancelot left his homeland, renounced his titles, took only armor, a sword, and an ideal. He reached Camelot not as a supplicant, but as an answer to the king's challenge. His eyes were dark like a morning lake, and his speech was simple and precise. In battle he fought swiftly and accurately, like the wind, without rage or fear. Everyone who saw Lancelot in battle froze not from fear, but from admiration. Arthur accepted him as a brother, valuing his skill and loyalty. Merlin watched Lancelot silently for a long time, then said, "You are too pure, and the world loves such only for a time. Your fate is complex and unpredictable." That same day Guinevere saw Lancelot. She was silent, looking at him only once, but that glance was filled with deep meaning. Guinevere was a queen in essence, not by status. Wise like the morning sun, beautiful like a unique song, she sailed through life as if on waves. Her words brought comfort, and her silence carried a weight stronger than any command. She was a force that soothed hearts and guided destinies. Arthur loved Guinevere deeply, but reservedly. His heart was divided between her and Britain. He could not belong to her fully while remaining king. Lancelot was near, too close. Their glances were innocent at first, then followed by private conversations, and finally silences in which everything was said. These silences were long and full of meaning. They spoke without words, understanding each other without explanations, as if guarding a secret that could not be revealed. They both struggled with it, Guinevere with pride, Lancelot with honor, but feelings, once breaking through armor, know no words of duty or prohibition. Lancelot went on campaigns for a month and returned silently. Guinevere watched him leave and went to the garden where no one saw her tears. They knew they were hurting Arthur, but they were not evil. They were simply people subject to the passions and weaknesses of their hearts. Arthur suspected. A king who hears the land cannot fail to hear the crack in his own house. He knew, but did not ask. Not out of fear, but out of pain. He understood. If he said, "Everything will break," then he himself would break. Silence was his protection and punishment. All of this was seen by Morgana, the shadow of Camelot, Arthur's sister, a sorceress, a woman with a soul full of wounds and a thirst to destroy the myth of the goodness of the king. She waited until, on the most solemn day, the Midsummer Festival, one of the knights stood up with an accusation. A man with a sick heart and an envious mind. The crowd froze. Arthur's face turned white as snow. Guinevere was silent. Lancelot was not in the city at that moment. Guinevere was taken into custody not as a prisoner, but as a criminal. The people were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, sensing trouble. But at dawn, Lancelot returned. He did not shout. He did not fight and demanded nothing. He came for her, not for glory or truth, but for her alone. He tore her from captivity, threw off the guards like a storm of leaves, and just as quickly disappeared. Camelot cracked from this event. Some knights left Camelot. Some went to Lancelot, and some simply vanished. The rest stayed, but their eyes lost their former light. Trust was gone. Integrity disappeared. The round table ceased to be round. A crack appeared, not destroying it immediately, but starting the countdown. Arthur remained, looking at his sword and not knowing if he was needed now that the heart was silent. Destruction does not always come with a cry. Sometimes destruction creeps, sometimes sits nearby, sometimes wears a face in which you recognize yourself, sometimes it whispers. This whisper was called Mordred. Mordred was Arthur's son, but this fact was never spoken in the stone halls, never written in chronicles, and never sung in ballads. He was born in sin on a twisted night, from which the king averted his eyes. His mother was Morgana, a secret felt by the walls of Camelot. Mordred grew up alone, not in poverty, but in detachment. He knew his blood was royal. In this was both his strength and his curse. He learned to observe, to study the world around him, hiding his feelings and secrets, surviving in the shadow of a great story that rejected him. While others spoke, Arthur learned to wait, while they rushed forward. In his soul burned no rage, but reigned a silence, dangerous like a drawn bow. Upon learning about Mordred, Arthur tried to do the right thing. He brought him closer, gave him a title and the right to be near, saying, "Blood is blood." "If you reject family, you become the root of war," Arthur said, but something in Mordred did not take root. He walked through foreign halls, smiling evenly but soullessly. His voice was calm, but in that calm there was no peace. He did not dream of the throne, he patiently awaited his moment. Camelot cracked under the weight of the past. Arthur listened as the supports fell away, a calm observer of destruction. Merlin did not return. Lancelot vanished into exile, losing everything he lived for. Guinevere went to a monastery, in white, with empty eyes. Arthur no longer found his reflection in her. Then Mordred understood. His time had come. He gathered the army not as a conqueror, but as an heir. "I am the son of the king. If the king does not protect the crown, who else but me?" Mordred declared as Camelot began to crack. Some knights doubted, others grew weary. Arthur was left alone, without justice or love, holding only a sword in his hands. And then the battle began, decisive and inevitable, where the fate of Camelot hung by a thread. The dawn was misty at Camelot. The sounds of horns moaned in the air. The earth trembled not from footsteps, but from the premonition of coming events. Arthur donned old armor, not ceremonial, but the kind he wore in his youth. He was no longer young, but on this day he became himself. Amid cries, steel, blood, and dust they met. Father and son, king and destruction. They were silent, simply swinging their swords. Excalibur and Mordred's black blade clashed. Truth and despair, light and shadow opposed each other in their duel. Both fell. Mordred's sword pierced Arthur's chest, and Arthur's sword entered his son's heart. Everything fell silent after this battle. Loyal knights gathered the dying king. They did not weep, looking at the ground as if they became part of it at that moment. Arthur was taken to the lake where his legend began. He looked at the water and whispered, "Everything must return to where it came from." Sir Bedivere, who followed the king to the end, raised Excalibur and threw it into the water. The water trembled. From the water rose a white hand from another reality, took the sword, and disappeared, leaving a mysterious silence around. A black barge without sails appeared, gliding over the water like glass. On it stood 3 women in white. The faces of the women were calm and eternal. They were not sad. Their presence was mysterious and everlasting. They took Arthur and carried him into the mist, to Avalon. To this day, no one knows if he died or not. His fate is shrouded in mystery. Some insist that he is dead, while others believe he sleeps, and will awaken when Britain needs a king to save the country. Thus ends this story, not with a loud roar, but with a quiet whisper, as if in the night where the hearth fires have already burned out. The swords fell silent, and in the mists, only legends are heard again, living in the shadows and guarding ancient secrets. Close your eyes and let this tale carry you into sleep, into a world where legends do not die but only